looking at hundreds of minefields, deep laid entrenched positions, booby trapping, and really work that will last many, many years.
Just over a week ago, the Ukrainian army retook the city of Kherson, but the Russian occupation and the fighting has left the city in a mess, and clearing up has been made more dangerous by explosive mines, bombs that go off as people come across them. Some think the area may now be the most mined in the world. Let's talk again to James Cowan, who's CEO of the demining charity, the Halo Trust. We've spoken to him actually throughout the war in Ukraine and the various moments where the Russian advance has receded, leaving behind these sort of objects of terror. We can talk to him again now. Good morning, James.
Good morning.
So what does Kherson and the regions around it look like, as far as you're concerned, to do with mines?
Well, Halo had been working in the Donbass before February. And of course, when the war started, we moved up to around Kyiv. And we've had our work cut out there, huge amounts of ordnance cleared around Kyiv. But the reason why I mentioned Kyiv and not Kherson initially is because the Russians only stayed there for 2 weeks and they left voluntarily. Now, of course, our humanitarian duty is to get into newly liberated areas like Kherson. But of course, the difference is that the Russians did not leave voluntarily. They had time to dig in, huge amounts of destruction caused in a very urban area. So we are anticipating vast amounts more ordnance in and around Kherson. We're actually already near Kharkiv now, and in the villages around Kharkiv, we're seeing this on a really truly gigantic scale. We're looking at hundreds of minefields, deep laid entrenched positions, booby trapping, and really work that will last many, many years.
What's the purpose of this from a Russian point of view? Is it to create minefields that will take a long time to make safe, and therefore it slows the rehabilitation process? Or actually are they seeking to trick people into taking their lives as they return home?
So I think they probably have a kind of tactical and a strategic objective. The tactical one is simply to delay the Ukrainian advance. Having been on the offensive at the start of the war, the Russians are now firmly on the defensive, and so they're going to try and use every trick in the box to make this as difficult for the Ukrainians as they possibly can. Because they no longer have enough trained soldiers, they're having to use their very ill-trained, conscripted soldiers to best effect by helping them out by using landmines. So they will use the winter months to try and delay the Ukrainians through the tactical use of minefields. The strategic objective, though, is to make Ukraine economically unviable. And we're seeing that with the destruction of the Ukrainian power system and trying to make liberated Ukrainian cities impossible to actually live in. So there's a strategic and a tactical objective here, which we need to keep in mind.
What about the human level, James? I think one of the times we've spoken, you've mentioned this idea of booby trapping toys. Presumably, have you seen evidence of that in Ukraine? And is that's presumably just designed to kill children? I mean, that's as low as it possibly gets.
It is about as low as it gets. And it's designed to kill or maim anyone who is unwary enough to try and pick up such a thing. But there's lots of other ways of doing this. Tripwires between trees to catch people who go out into the woods, perhaps foraging for mushrooms, which is a common practice in Ukraine. It might be a tripwire on a door, so you enter a newly liberated house, perhaps you return home to your old home and you go in through the door and there's a tripwire attached to a grenade. So all these tricks are being used. A particularly difficult one is the mixing of artillery ammunition with landmines. So you essentially booby trap a landmine's pressure plate and attach it to a main charge from an artillery round. You create a vastly larger explosion. There's not just deliberate booby trapping, though. Vast amounts of Russian ordnance is not going off. They're having about a 20% failure rate with their artillery ammunition. And given that they're using artillery on a First World War scale, that's a huge amount of the ammunition that's not going off and is simply burying in the ground and will detonate at some point when a tractor or a car goes over it.
So is it just finally, is this an achievement? I mean, this must feel like an overwhelmingly large task to try and get rid of this stuff.
Well, I think this is what we exist for. We're the world's largest landmine clearance charity. We're used to scaling up. We've been very well supported by our donors, and we have already grown hugely during the course of 2022, and we have plans to grow to 1,500, 2,000 staff next year. The Ukrainian authorities themselves are training large numbers of people. So this is about not just winning a war with military support, and we heard the announcement from our Prime Minister of £50 million of support militarily, but it's also about winning the peace. And actually, there's huge value for money in this. The British have committed £2 million to mine clearance, so that's helpful. But when you compare it with the vast amounts being spent on the military campaign, I do think we need to start thinking about how we win the peace as well as win the war. And you cannot get Ukraine going again economically if all its buildings, all its industry, all its agriculture is contaminated by unexploded ordnance.
Yeah, well, you're doing a hell of a job, certainly. James, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
That's James Cowan, the CEO of the demining charity, the Halo Trust.